training and mental health. Is it important? Is there a connection? Yes. And that's the whole video if that's all you have time for, 10 seconds in. But this is a bit of a two-sided thing because it goes in two directions there depending on what angle we want to take. The training from a clinician's perspective, the one offering therapy, but also training from a client perspective, the one receiving. And I'm going to make a case very briefly that the answer is yes to both. When you think about anything you do, any hobby, anything that has someone, we'll say, more advanced in understanding, guiding you through that, because you can work on your mental health alone. People do it all the time, often more effectively, depending on the person. But you can also learn an instrument on your own. You can, heck, I was going to say you can learn a sport, but a lot of them are team sports. But things like, ping pong and pool and individual or small team sports like pickleball and things like that, you don't really need a coach, but it's often going to be better with one. So training from a mental health perspective, I think everyone has a right to themselves to train their mental health. That often comes through discipline and fortitude, is having good mental wherewithal. And really it comes down to distress tolerance, I think, and differentiation. Those are two really big ones. You can add more for sure. Distress tolerance being literally, as it sounds, your toleration towards distress. So your ability to handle and effectively respond towards stressful situations. So, you have a medical emergency pop up, and then you have a work emergency, and then a friendship issue is happening. And for you not to spiral or have a mental breakdown, that's distress tolerance. You can handle that kind of stress. It's not easy or enjoyable, and it's hard, but you can respond in the moment and handle it. The differentiation, a better way to say that is it's your ability to be okay when other people are not. Now, that's not to say that we are lacking empathy. It's just saying if 3 people around me are in panic mode, I'm not going into panic mode. I'm going to attune to the situation and help work through whatever is creating this, as opposed to also stressing. Or if you have to have a hard conversation with someone and they're really struggling, where you can hold empathy and you not panic and feel like, oh, I got to take care of them, or I have to struggle with them. It's I can be okay when other people are not. Differentiation. And then the first one was distress tolerance. Those are two really big ones, mental health. And I think people practicing mental health as a career, like myself, like any psychotherapist, they have an obligation to take care of their mental health. There's a line there. A lot of people say, it's good for therapists to show that they're not perfect or that they struggle with things. That's definitely true. And yeah, I do think we have a higher standard. So I don't want to work with a therapist who's spiraling all the time. If they can't handle their mental health, I don't want to work with them. Now, bearing in mind, handling is not the same as struggling. So a therapist who struggles with certain things, that's not the same. That's different. It's more about they can't function or manage their life because of the mental illness that they're going through. That's a little bit different, or at least the one that they are struggling with is not the one that they're also helping other people. You can't help someone through something that you can't do yourself, generally speaking. There's some wiggle room with that. That's something we're taught a lot in this field is you can only lead someone as far as you've gone. I do think there's some holes in that, but overall it's a decent starting principle. So, but the training part of the therapist also comes down to how much that therapist continues training their ability to therapize, so to speak. So, if you are a therapist, you're required to, in most instances, I believe in the US, in most states, for sure the 2 that I'm licensed in, but I think most of them you renew your license in 2-year increments. And that has requirements in terms of how that's done. So my 2 licensures are in Kansas and Missouri. They both renew every 2 years, slightly different times depending on when you got your license, and they require 40 hours of training. But they have different requirements. I believe Kansas requires like 3 hours of ethics training and 3 hours of diagnosis, whereas Missouri requires 3 hours of suicide self-harm education. I think I have those right in their respective states. And then some allow for like self-study, or if you're doing certain teaching or presentations or you're in consultation groups, some of those can count as extended training. So they have different rules for what counts. But the idea there is you're continuing to develop. Now, there are actually a lot of ways to get these trainings done that you can leave not really any wiser than when you entered into that 2-year period. So a lot of these trainings can be done not like in a sneaky way, but without actually going and training, and you can kind of phone it in. So some of these trainings have post tests. Any online training you do, you have to take a quiz at the end. You don't have to do that for in-person trainings, but I think that's helpful because it shows that you learned something. I'm not going to get into the whole up and down on my philosophy for trainings and what makes them effective, but I can tell you that it is set up in a way that you can stay just as ignorant for your entire tenure as a therapist, or you can rapidly develop depending on the training approach that you take. So I think it's healthy to, as a therapist, be excited about training and taking that next step, because getting the degree was the prerequisite for this career. You're not done. I think it's unfortunate when anyone takes their degree as the last bit of education that they needed. Things change, especially in psychology. It's such an early field, relatively speaking, towards all the other sciences. Mental health has always been there. You can find old, like thousands of years old kind of books that allude to the state of being, and they don't say mental health, but you can attach it to like ways to live in a healthy way. So the idea of mental health has been here for forever, as far as I can tell. But the actual study of psychology and its current understanding is only around that like 100-year-ish mark, and maybe 150 or so, depending on where it's kind of arbitrary where you pick a start date. But a lot of people will start maybe in the Freud era. Like this is kind of the start of psychology as a science. And it does branch into both art and science depending on the specifics of your approach in your study. But nonetheless, it's new compared to all the other broader sciences. I address that because that means, gosh, like when I hear somebody tell me they learn what I do for a living, and they'll say, I got my undergrad in psychology, and they're like in their 40s and even in their 30s. They got their undergrad like 10 years ago. Respectfully, a lot of that's kind of useless now because we've moved along so far from that. There's a lot of staples. So if you take psychology in high school, you might learn a little bit about Freud and Jung. They kind of skip that a lot, but you'll learn the Stanford prison experiment. You'll learn the Harry Harlow experiences. You'll probably learn a little bit about Erickson, maybe Vygotsky if you're doing some child development stuff, and you'll learn about the hierarchy of needs and a lot of just kind of staple studies that were done that now have laws against doing them. Very valuable, but very inhumane in certain ways. You'll learn a lot about those early studies. Of course, you'll learn classical and operant conditioning and all these things that you'll learn in high school. But a lot of colleges were teaching that, and now that's just standard high school psych. I remember taking a high school class in psychology, my first high school psych class, and of the two that we had, just regular and honors. If you took them both, it was a year. That's it. And the textbook we were using was the same textbook that a friend of mine, their parent was in college, going back to school, and it was the same textbook that they were using in college. So, they were using a textbook that us in high school were using. And then by the time I got to, and they actually went to the same school that I ended up going to for my psych degree, we weren't using that book. We were using a much more updated one. So just within, I was a sophomore at the time, so just within the 3 years it took for me to finish up and go into undergrad, we were already upgraded in terms of material. So my point is it's rapidly expanding because it's so new. So the importance of continuing education is actually really important, because if you take high school psych, if you take undergrad and graduate, within about a year or two, the degree's not useless. Like you're using the information's good, and the classics stay classic, but the updated information becomes helpful. And we get enough updated information that you've seen things like the Stanford prison experiment and a couple others being questioned and doubted in certain ways, or we have maybe more refined research or more refined examples. The reason some of these older ones stick around is because we've made laws that prohibit those types of experiments, so we'll probably never get them like that again in an ethical way. So they stick around because we're doing different types now. So, point being with all that, it only takes a couple of years. So if you're listening and you have your undergrad in psych, and I would say if it's been over 2 years since you graduated, you're behind now. What they're teaching the new round of students is likely going to be done with new textbooks as it sits. So again, it's not saying your degree is useless, it's just the requirement to stay updated is much higher than a lot of fields. And every field has ongoing research and updates, but this field, stuff can get outdated quickly. Like I said, all the original stuff that you'll learn stays the same, and the basic human psychology stays the same. But the expansion of that and the application of it moves along, which is really cool because it's an era where, if you're interested in the field, you get to hang out with those changes a lot. So the importance of staying trained is actually very important if you want relevance in the psych field. Mental health care is similar but different. A lot of it's theoretical studies and applications from the research side and academia into the implications for therapeutic approaches, because not every study on psychology actually, potentially the majority, are more brain studies and human nature studies, and then we find ways to apply them into therapy. There are definitely many therapists doing the research, PhD level therapists who are in academia as well doing research. The Gottman Institute is a very prime example of this kind of work. Anyway, I can spend a lot of time on this. Point being, it's important as therapists to stay up to date and to do trainings. And even though we are required to do 40 hours, it's really easy to not learn a whole lot from that, admittedly. So it's important to, if you're a therapist listening, to really focus on the trainings that you do and prioritize them, because the field changes and adapts, and really use that as an opportunity. You have to get the hours anyway. So try to use it as an opportunity to really develop your career and your clinical expertise. And if you are not a therapist and you're listening, you can also stay up to date on research. But my bigger encouragement would be treat your mental health not like this task, but like this honor that you have the privilege of managing, and train it the same way that I would encourage you to train physically, to train your hobbies. Just your mind and how it operates in relation to the world is one of the most important parts of your existence. And your perspective your ability to train your mind can be the difference between a happy life and a miserable life. No other context change. You and I can have the exact same life, but if my perspective is joy and I've learned how to navigate stressors, and your perspective is pain and suffering and victimization, and you've internalized stressors, we will live wildly different lives. So, and that's accounting for every other factor. So it's really important to handle your mental health and to work on it. And while access to therapy is a really big deal, we have so much online now, and we have so much in terms of resources, both virtual and with libraries. If you can, you're not gonna have as much research, but you'll have a lot of mainstream books you can get at the library, and even frankly YouTube. I mean, I'm on here talking, so there's a lot that you can do personally. There's definitely some hurdles that you'll hit where professional care is helpful, but I think for about 80% of, and this is no study, I'm spitballing a number, but I do think for roughly about 80% of mental health issues, they can be readily handled at home. And, or maybe you can get 80% of the way to it, but a lot of it we can do at home. But it is often easier, faster, and sometimes needed to have professional input. So, importance of training in mental health, I would say very important. I'd love to hear if you're listening and you've had experience either as a therapist with training or training your own mental health, what that has been like. If this is something you agree with, or if you have a different perspective, let me know. If you're interested in therapy services in any capacity, or you're a therapist and you're interested in further development in that regard, reach out. The info is in the description. If you're enjoying this, subscribe, like, share, let people know. This is fun for me, and I want to get it to as many people as could benefit from it. So that's it for this episode. Happy Monday, and I will see everyone next week.